here then. Okay, so in this preliminary budget meeting, that's not a committee of the whole meeting, we can make decisions. So are there any additions? Does council have any additions? CAO have any additions?
No, Mayor.
Adoption of the agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Goering, second by Councillor Dickey. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Public comment period. So this is an opportunity for the public to speak about anything that's on the agenda tonight. Is there anybody online that's wishing to say some words? Nothing that you can see. Is there anybody in the gallery who has anything to say? No? All right. Then let's go through the outstanding items, grants to community groups. I'll turn it over to staff and you can take us through.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I'll hand it over to Trevor. There was a number of outstanding items and questions and whatnot. So he's going to kind of go through this bit of a high level update of where that is. Answer any questions you might have specific to that. And I think based on our discussion we had earlier, we probably consider it's all new information or some updated information. We probably can start from the beginning and work our way through the tab. And some will go faster than others, I'm sure, but at least we can kind of tick those off if that works for council. Okay. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so I'll just start by summarizing all the information that was requested at the last meeting we were able to obtain. So that's what you'll see with a lot of the change outs of the documents that have been provided. We've just added missing budget information or actual information where it was requested. A lot of that had already been supplied, so I have to sort of take a slap on the wrist that I didn't already have that to you. We also made a couple of updates with regards to amounts, including the Grace Manor amount, as well as the Lamplighters amount in the grant stage. So the result of that was a change to a couple of those high level reports. So with the tab 18, the consolidated grants to groups, a couple of the numbers that did change were the community organizations line, which we get into the details of in tab 19, and the golf course line, we bumped up the capital amount by 5,000 to agree to their request, as well as showing the offset of the amount that was approved last year at the end of the year. So a couple of the changes there. And so going on into tab 19 is where we laid out a little bit more detail with regards to the community groups, the Regional Arts Council, and Search and Rescue and such. And this is where you'll see the addition of the Grace Manor funding, as well as the Lamplighters funding request. The one other change that's on this report is also the $25,000 is showing under fiscal items or from general surplus. That just shows where the funding for Grace Manor is coming from. Oh, yeah, the other main change as well on this is the Toad River maintenance activity that had previously been listed, that has been moved into operations now.
Good.
Okay. So with regards to the backup, perhaps I'll just review sort of my line items of the information that was missing, just to identify where that's been added, or have you had an opportunity to look into the details?
So are you looking at item 20 and further, or are you still on 19?
Still on 19. So that was where some of the information was actually just for, it was the Grace Manor, the Northern Lamplighters under 19. That's right.
Yeah, there was some
Mayor.
additions there, but I don't think there was any requests for information.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the requests for information are starting at tab 20.
Okay, so can we just stop and deal with 19 then? Tab 19?
Yeah.
So are there any questions from anybody about tab 19? There was, I think everything that's in there, we've talked about and discussed and figured out that it was acceptable to us. So unless there's any additions or questions, I'm just looking for consensus that we include all of those items into the budget this year.
So just a confirmation of what you're asking. We're not making any decisions, right?
No,
So
we're-
you're just,
We're adding them into the draft so that we can go to the public with it.
okay, yeah, I'm good.
That's my intent today, is to figure out what's going into the draft budget so that then we can present it to the public on the 21st. Is that 20th? Okay, that's the plan so far. It seems how it's supposed to be the 6th. We're only 14 days late, so that's not too bad considering how much we had to consider.
Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
There were a couple of other items, just follow-up pieces for a couple of the groups under tab 19. We did get clarification from the Arts Council that their ask was indeed 5,000. They had
Okay.
referenced 3,500 in their letter.
Right,
That was just an oversight.
right.
And then the other one was, the library amount. And we just got clarification on the description of the change year over year. And the information that, I think it was just a matter of perspective, where the library indicated an increase of 16,000, which was an increase from their base amount. But the actual increase was around 32,000 because it was from the actual amount that was approved in the prior year. Yeah.
That's in tab 21 though, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Tab 19. Is everybody comfortable that the grants to those groups? So we're talking about the Arts Council, the Search and Rescue, Toad River Area Community Society, Northern Rockies Senior Society, Grace Manor, and the Lamplighters. We're all comfortable. There's some new stuff there. I think from a senior's perspective, it's about $75,000 total that's new to the budget that's never been there before. Everybody's, I'm seeing general nods that we're done with tab 19. Okay, good. Okay, Trevor,
Oh,
tab 20.
so tab 20 is the golf course. We did update the information for some of the missing pieces. And we also provided an updated income statement that was split out between two of their primary activities, the golf course and the simulator. And I think at this point, unless there's some questions, I'll pass it over to Scott.
Yeah, well, let council have any discussions, just, yeah, we provided information for council's discussion and, any questions you might have. We've spent a considerable amount of time having discussions with the golf course group to get an understanding of the numbers and whatnot. And, I'll say that there's obviously some opportunities there from the golf course as a whole in terms of the asset and some, opportunities regarding developing an asset management program for the golf course itself, to look after the asset. And it's some comments that you've made in the past too, Councilor Growing, regarding that item being an asset and what should be looked after from a organization perspective in terms of the NRM and the group that looks after the golf course and on our behalf. And I think it's fundamentally a change in direction that we've done, that how we've looked at it in the past. And there's been some legacy processes that have remained in place that we've overcome at times there, or that we've looked at, and some things have been overcome. But I think fundamentally it's to really take a look at how the golf course from an operational perspective is managed, so that the costs to operate the golf course, let's say, are in the appropriate streams. And I'll
Please,
leave
go
it,
ahead.
any questions, and I'll leave it with council, because there's going to be lots of discussion on this one.
Yeah, so just so that I'm understanding what you're saying, we aren't at a position right now where we have begun that process in terms of asset management for the golf course. Like, this is just an opportunity that we have moving forward, not that we're looking at for the 2023 budget season.
Mostly correct. So we're not there because we don't have we need to establish the inventory out there first, because there's a lot of stuff for us to blow the dust off and take a look at. So in order to get a full-fledged asset management program out there, we need to really understand what the inventory is, because traditionally it's something that's been looked after by the society. And it's something that really needs to get under our hood. We need to look at, and what do we own as the asset? What is it? What's the inventory? Assess the asset. So assess that inventory to determine what the cost is to maintain it moving forward. There could be some opportunities moving in this budget where things like some of the capital requests that are in this budget could possibly get and would recommend, I guess, that get rolled into our program. Currently, we'd have to sort out what the smoothing of those costs would be in the future. But there's to truly understand, get a better understanding, I guess I'll say, of where those operational costs would be this year. There's some opportunities in this budget, and I know the mayor's been taking a look and going line by line. Also, we've had some conversations and we've chatted with the group about it. And essentially, it's what services is that group providing for the NRM to run a golf course, and what should we as an organization, they might assist in managing it, but what do we truly need to look at from a cost perspective to operate it? And just quite simply, it's no different than similar to say how the curling rink might operate at the rec facility, but essentially. And also, when I say fundamentally make a change in how we look at this, is it truly a grant to a group, or is it funding an operation that's provided a service to the community? There is truly a difference, right? So the program itself, what we need to do, we started off, well, we made an attempt to look at some policy work with previous council prior to the election regarding how funding could be requested and stuff. But we need to, I think, peel that back a couple more layers down and fundamentally look at what streams do these various organizations fit on, right? And what service, like a grant to a group would be the Arts Council, essentially. But running a golf course, a municipal golf course, essentially what it is,
That we own.
that we own, or running a curling lounge is not a grant to a group. It's an operation that someone is operating on our behalf, and quite frankly, doing a commendable job based on the resources they have, from a cost perspective, right? Because the reality is that we're not, as staff, we're not questioning the cost to operate the golf course. It's just where do those costs sit, and where should they sit, and so that fundamentally councils make a decision on the operations and understand who's responsible for what. And that would require a service agreement, which we don't have. It's things that are covered under a lease agreement, but truly it's a service agreement. What service are you providing? What are we paying for? What do we expect you to do? What revenues are you keeping to maintain your items that you look after versus us? And that's not just specific to the golf course. It's also to have a discussion also and sort out so there's a level of consistency. And again, with the curling rink, that association and the golf course, because there's very many similarities, right? The funding mechanism is a little different because the building's attached and whatnot, but it's to truly understand who's responsible for what and who's paying for what. And we're not there yet, of course, but we've already started those discussions with, say, the golf course. And we also started putting some plans in place in terms of doing the assessment of golf course, which many can't occur, or it cannot occur until the snow is up and running. Irrigation system is a perfect example, right? I mean, the irrigation system is one that it's our asset, and kudos to that group to try to maintain it. But when you sit back and look at it, it's been a miss over the years that we've expected that group to maintain that infrastructure, right? Manage it and help maintain it just day to day, but not go to them and say, there's a leak, you guys go off and fix our issue. And like I said, fundamentally, we had to stand back and recognize that. And I said that to Harv is the rec center, if the chiller lines under the slab at the curling rink start to leak, we wouldn't go to the curling association and say, fix our
Fix
chiller
it.
lines for us, right? Or if a water line breaks. And so that's, and it's meeting with those groups to say, so there's a clear understanding where that line is drawn in the sand. And again, it's just fundamentally to start from with a blank sheet and map that out. And it's going to take some work, but the intent is to get it done so that we hit the ground running next year as part of this process. And take a look at all those groups to say what streams do they truly belong in, and the tabs will probably look different next year in terms of what heading they sit on. So, long-winded answer, but that's some of the work we do in the background, specific to this, and it's just taking a bit to kind of get to it. I'll pass it up to you, Mayor.
Thank you,
Benno.
Scott. That you took away the thunder and.
I didn't mean to do that. I'm
No, no.
sorry.
But no, with respect to, before we get into the numbers, I did want to talk about that service versus a nonprofit group and try to get everybody's feel. And, I'm sensing, as you explained what you're doing, I'm sensing there's agreement around here with respect to an asset and bringing that asset into the asset management plan as part of that we have and that we've won awards for, right? And understanding what that asset is and what it costs, and then providing the service to the community for that asset is what this group of people, the Golf Course Society, is doing for us. So again, and you've said it's a matter of splitting out, and so this is a transition year. I think their funding should be based on the understanding that they will come to the table with us and sit down and work out what a service agreement looks like. So the funding issue would be contingent on them participating in that. I think there are some basics that we might be able to agree to that the taxpayer shouldn't be funding. Right? I mean, we probably should not be funding the simulator. For instance, the simulator is a losing proposition. We supported it for them to run it because it was supposed to enhance the income and the budget, and it just hasn't worked. So throwing good money after bad is not something. So we actually can separate all of those costs, and that's why we asked them to give us an income statement that separates those out for two reasons. One is so that we can see what it does to their overall budget, but also so that if we start cutting their regular budget, we don't cut too far, too deeply into the golf course operations, that we truly do split off or hive off the operations to the simulator. Next is, what are we doing supporting food and beverage? Right? The food and beverage at the golf course is a self-supporting, self-sustaining, and should be. And we should be separate from that because of the liabilities that go with serving alcohol to people and food and making sure that all of that is looked after. So they still would provide a service because they're doing it, but they could do it under a separate agreement where they just lease the clubhouse. We provide a clubhouse that is capable of being used for that. And then that society owns and operates that particular part. Now, if you look at their budget and you look at the numbers that they provided, there's an opportunity there for that to make some money. With respect to the golf course pro shop, again, it's part of that building. I think the difference between the service and the volunteers is that in order to have a golf course, you need to have somebody who will operate the pro shop. So not necessarily sell the shoes and the golf clubs, and that belongs to them. But taking reservations, making sure people understand where to go, getting them set up on the golf to actually go out, that's a service that they're providing to us, I believe. And so there's an opportunity, I think, that we pay a certain amount of, or we pay the equivalent of a certain amount of wages in a year to make sure that that pro shop is adequately staffed, and we can determine what we agree that looks like. And that forms the first part of any money that we give to them. So that's the pro shop. The building itself, the clubhouse itself, could be looked at as we're providing the equipment because we own everything. If they were to shut down tomorrow and, you know, and they would walk, sorry? Yeah,
Sorry, we know that we own all that? Like, is that?
from the discussion I had, it's gotta be part of the discussion, but
That's
from the
yet to be-
discussion I had with them, they understand that if they walked away and they sold everything, where would the money go? It goes nowhere, right? They're not allowed to take it as a nonprofit organization and put it in their individual pockets. They're like, they can't do anything with it. So when we sit down and we talk about the service agreement or the lease agreement, it'll make it out very clearly. And if they say, oh, no, we bought that, and that's ours, we'll have a discussion about that. But eventually we can sort of peg down exactly what it is that's ours and exactly what it is that's theirs. And that becomes then part of our estimate. Like there will be a debate about the trailer, the house trailer that's there, I'm sure, right? About who owns it. And, you know, whether it was funded from surplus or whether it was funded from capital dollars that we, you know, or whether they all put in money on their own. So there'll be a debate about that. And the same is true with just about everything. So, but from my discussions with them, they recognize that the machinery, equipment, and buildings and grounds belong to the municipality. So if that's the case, we've taken care of the pro shop, taken care of the food and beverage, we've taken care of an agreement on the lease for the clubhouse itself. Now you move to the outside operations. So the outside operations is growing grass and maintenance, essentially. Growing grass, cutting it so that you actually have a product that you can sell to people, which is the golfing itself. So there's the act of growing grass, and there's all the equipment and facilities used to maintain the grass and keep it going. I think that there's a split there. There's when it comes to maintaining the equipment and maintaining the grounds, that's part of the asset management plan. Owning, understanding that you know, the maintenance on the mowers and that sort of thing is done by us because it's ours, or it's partially paid for by us because it's ours. But when it comes to growing grass, fertilizer, grass seed, that's sort of the actual getting out there and cutting the grass, setting the pins, all the things it takes to actually grow or maintain a golf course so you have a product, would be theirs. And when it comes to the revenues, you look at what are the revenues that they have coming in. Well, they've got the golf course operations. This includes green fees, memberships, rentals of equipment, rentals of golf carts, rentals of, oh, sorry, I just shut that off.
Ring. Oops.
So so if we were able to separate those out, that's where the discussion starts to come in with respect to what's grass growing, what's operational, building a product, and what's maintaining the grounds because we own the grounds, right? So then we can have a specific conversation around the capital. What they'll probably do the construction of everything, but they're enhancing and improving our asset. So for instance, the renovation that they did on the front of the number 6 green, if you're not familiar, they re-renovated half the green and the whole frontage of that because it's an uphill slope, and it was, you know, there was reasons for them to. That would be something we would talk about before they actually went ahead and did it, right? That's I don't think we want to be in on the decisions of how they operate, but we want to be in on the capital improvements and the discussion about what seems to be the best priority and how much money is there available to either put new cart paths in or maybe we need a significant upgrade to the irrigation system or whatever it ends up, whatever clubhouse, a significant renovation to the clubhouse. Those are the sorts of things they'd come to and they talk to us the same way that we look at capital improvements. And so that would stand aside, or actually it wouldn't even be part of the agreement with them. That it would be funded probably by us and built by them, because they can do it cheaper than we can do it. But there's oversight by Harvey or whoever the pertinent person is in our organization to oversee that sort of thing, whether it's, the rec guys or whether it's the public works folks. They'd all, we have people there. So if you accept that premise, you can look at the document that they gave us. And you can go through it line by line and highlight what's theirs and what's ours. And add up the totals. And it's a basic rough idea of what we think we own and what they own and whether we can agree. Now, this is a transition year. This is not, we shouldn't be going through a budget line like this, but there's so much confusion. It took me a long time to sort of sort it out, and you guys have been working on it even longer than me. So what should I say? Do I want to say it's a fact? Is the numbers on this page. We can work with the numbers on this page if we accept the premise that Scott has put forward. This is a service and we're responsible for certain pieces of it. They're responsible. And because it's a transition year, we do our best to say, okay, we'll fund we don't want anything to do with the simulator. We don't want anything to do with food and beverage. That's all on you guys. And we figure out some kind of a lease agreement with them over that. We are prepared to fund somebody to operate the pro shop. And we can talk about, Aaron and I sort of talked about what would a similar job at the municipality pay for an hourly rate, and then what's their non-union outfit. So the union costs are not on there, but the WCB, all those sort of employee costs are still there. And I think we figured it out to about 18%-ish. And a similar person who was doing that's making on the order of 25, 26 bucks an hour at 18%. And you're getting up to close to $40 an hour. 12 hours a day, 150 days in the season, essentially 5 months. May, June, July, August, September. There might be, they might get 160 days or maybe only 120 days, depending on how much it rains. But on average, I think that's fair. We'll fund, to the tune of $35 or $40 an hour, somebody to run that pro shop 12 hours a day. And some will say, well, some days it's 16. Yeah, but other days it's 8. So on average, 12 hours a day, 150 days a year. That's what we're prepared to put forward. For that person, that works out to $55,000, I think. Yeah,
Just
okay.
pause. Okay.
Yeah.
Where are you getting the $40 an hour
okay.
from? Because you lost me.
Okay, so Aaron and I sat down and looked at what would a similar person who's administrative in nature, doing cash sales, some administration work with respect to scheduling, right? That kind of a person, what hourly rate would we pay them working for us?
And you came up with
We came up with $27 times 18%. Yeah.
That's the piece that I need to know. So it's
Yeah.
$25 per hour plus the MERC.
About 18% the mercs, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Round-
But that
round
could
it.
also
Just
be a
some
contract.
Rounded. What's that?
That-
But we're just getting.
What, I'm just trying to get a
Because we're
ballpark.
not getting into the weeds right
No,
now.
no.
We're just
We are in the
thinking
weeds
conceptually.
conceptually.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
So, and giving you order of magnitude cost,
Okay, got it.
order magnitude cost. So that's roughly $55,000. The next person we would pay for is the ground superintendent. Now, the ground superintendent grows grass, but the ground superintendent also does maintenance on the equipment. So we don't know how much of that is grass growing and how much of it, because nobody's keeping any records. We're in a transition. So it seems to me 50-50 is fair. They put 90,000 there, our share would be $45,000 of that person. Or of that, I think it's $90,000 for wages on the outside, grass growing. What do they call it? They call it, grounds wages, yeah.
Well, it
that's what-
says $100,000.
Yeah, 100,000, sorry, so that
No,
would,
that's okay.
yeah, so that would be $50,000 there for that. So then you start looking at all the rest, I mean, you go down and look at all the rest. When it comes to service charges, bank charges, I just split it 50-50 because we don't know yet. So when you're looking at pages on this, you know, the wage, the EI expense, the CPP, that's all looked after in 50,000 and the 55, that's all looked after there already. So that you can take care of that. Cash over short service charges, just straight 50%. So if you looked at the bottom of page 7 of 10, there's cash over short 1,000. I just put 500 would be our cost. Same with service charges, 6,000, 3,000 would be our cost. Interest and bank charges, 1,300, 650 would be our cost. Now there's a few that I have questions. Because repairs and maintenance is on the bottom of that page for $4,000, and then it's over again on. It's in 2 places there, so I have questions about some of these things before we can finalize it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, so, and you're just thinking about doing this as the transition year,
Right.
not, because like if we did the comparison towards the curling rink, they take care of all of that. Like we don't do any of that.
Which?
Like the curling rink. We look after all of the capital at the curling rink, but we don't take care of any of the operating, right? Am I understanding that? Like, I don't see in the budget here where we give the curling club money to operate, but
No.
am I missing?
No, but I mean, in some cases, some things are rolled into costs already that are, I'll call it sunk costs at the rec center, right? So where this group might be working on something at the clubhouse or some maintenance item that needs to be required, we pick on the irrigation system. From a maintenance perspective, we're doing that already with our staff over.
For sure, but we don't pay the service charges or the
Yeah.
bank charges of the curling club to
No.
operate their lounge, right? Like they take care of all that. They just operate their lounge based on whatever funding that they get from wherever they get it from, right? Okay, thanks.
The reason I looked at that is because we're paying for somebody to run the pro shop, which means that there would be a cost involved with telephones and those kinds of things if we were to run it ourselves. So that's why I kind of lumped those in there as a 50-50 kind of a thing until you actually sit with them and say, you know, what benefit from us? And then it may be all of the telephones to them, and, you know, because they're using it for, so it was just, again, an order of magnitude.
Yeah,
that
so
I'm
this
trying to
exercise
understand.
you're trying to equate what it may cost us to operate. Yeah,
Right, for the things that we feel are belong to, are ours. Yeah. So if I can go over to page 7, then that's the page I was on. Go over to page 8 of that. So there's propane, telephone and internet. That's all club. They would look after all of that. And then down when it comes to clubhouse general expenses, accounting, legal is theirs, advertising is theirs, kitchen supplies is there. I don't know what commissions and subcontracts is. So I didn't highlight it. Conferences and training, that's obvious that there's nothing there. There's dues and memberships that they have. That's for their green superintendent. So that's their cost to grow grass. Office expenses, telephone, trailer expenses. I have a question mark there because I don't know what it means. But it gets down to insurance, license and fees. To run a golf course, we would have to have some insurance. So half of that is $5,250. Repair supplies and maintenance, I got it down at 50% dollars, but likely it's more ours than it is theirs. It's maintenance of the building, right? So for now, I've got it at 4,500 because I think it's mostly ours. Then when it comes to the grounds expenses, chemicals, fertilizer, landscaping, golf course supplies, it's all them. Sand and gravel, I don't know about because I don't know if it's building the asset or if it's for grass on the greens or for putting the golf course to bed. That would have to have a discussion over the years as to what that actually is. Shop supplies is 50% ours. Equipment and maintenance of $20,000 would be ours. Fuel and oil of 20,000 would be theirs, mostly for growing grass. There's no fuel and oil involved in maintenance that they might say some of it is, but freight and shipping superintendent allowances is theirs. So when I add all of that up, it comes to $142,150. And we've also pulled out, or I've pulled out, I didn't include, I guess, put it that way. What I didn't include was the irrigation. That would be pulled out and go into capital, our own capital. Nor did I look at the capital expense that they're talking about for, help me, what was it they were looking to do? Yeah, they were going to do some improvements to the trail, cart paths. That's right. So if you look, so then the revenues back over on page 7, all of the revenue around the golf course operations would be theirs to use to cut grass, grow grass. So memberships, green fees, driving range, pro shop, storage and rental, sponsorship, sign revenue. That adds up to 198,000 actual last year. The golf course food and bar sales would be all theirs. That adds up to 154,000 actual last year. So between the two of them, it's $348,000 revenue. Then if you start subtracting their expected budget items for everything that's theirs, not identified by me, start subtracting it off of that, they're left with about $37,000 at the end of the year. Something and don't quote me on that because I did so many numbers this afternoon that some of them are sticking in my mind and some of them are not. There is some left over surplus to them based on those numbers. That would be the concept in a transition year. And essentially over the last year, they got $135,000 from us. The 142, 150, the increase would be 5.5%, which is kind of in line with 5.5%. So that's 142, 150 over 135, right? They had the 110 and then they came back to 25,000. So that's 135. So 142,000 minus 135, and you do the percentage on that, it's about 5%, which is in line with the inflation index this year. And if you look at that from that perspective, you know, it really doesn't matter what the rest of it of how they've presented that's all we're prepared to give you. Sorry. You know, if they don't, I mean, they're asking for 200,000, but no, we think 142 is what we're prepared to pay for that service. And that's it. Thoughts?
I appreciate your
Long-winded.
breakdown that way.
Thank you.
It gives us at least a starting point, some sort of template, I guess. Like it gives us direction, and I like the idea. It's something I'll mull around for sure. Idea, but I'm not opposed to it off the start.
Yeah.
I absolutely think that that's headed in the right direction. Just, I haven't spoken to the individual, or the executive, I should say, of, the golf course or the golf club to see what their perspective on the whole idea is. I think the last thing we want to do is create a situation where they just walk away because, it's an asset for people living here and for tourism. And so I think that, as you all know, for years, I've been going on about we need to separate out this capital. It's our asset. Like, we should be taking care of that. I don't think that we should have a not-for-profit group or even a profit group looking after a municipality's asset. I think that that's first and foremost needs to be done under our direction, and we are elected officials. And so the community holds us accountable for the financial decisions that are made. And so I think that it should come back, that just like roads, water, sewer, whatever comes back to this table, we ultimately make those decisions. So I think that, yeah, that's how it has to go. So, yeah, no, I'm
So I think that, and Aaron and I did another very quick calculation, and correct me as I try to figure this one out. If you took their 200,000 and started backing out stuff we weren't prepared to pay for, and the losses that they had at the simulator, it comes to like, what, the 120, it was pretty even to them breaking even, right? So it kind of worked that way as well, just by backing out all of the things that from their budget that we wanted. So I think if we present this to them, I hope that they'd recognize that we need to make a change, and this is probably the best and easiest way to do it in a transition. Over to you, Scott.
So I apologize for stealing your thunder, but I think you talked me in with that. So the good news is I think we're all on the same page.
Well, I had the numbers, you did the.
We have been chatting with the executive. So we've discussed it. So they're quite actually, I think, relieved that there'll be a clear definition in terms of defining who's responsible for what. And we all acknowledge there's been some legacy issues that we've been both dealing with. It's time to kind of go with that clean slate of paper. Joke just to kind of lighten the mood around the assets and say, if you did leave and tell us to go, where to go, you're not going to take your irrigation system with you because it belongs to us or the cart paths and whatnot. And talked about that kind of stuff. But just from that 25,000 foot level, we talked about the asset and to take a bit of pressure off them, providing that, clearly defining who's responsible for what and at what cost. And there's at the end of the day, there's a cost to operate the golf course, and there's a cost to maintain the golf course. And we've, the bit of the aha moment we've had is going through this, and of course, busy with all kinds of other things and distractions. But the reality is that, we have a very robust asset management program. But we have an asset, the golf course, that we haven't really taken a great look at to understand truly how that asset's going to be maintained, so it can continue to be utilized and provide a service to the community for years to come. And fortunately, it's still operating, but the more we discuss it with the group, it's things like anything, your house, or we talk, like I preach many times with the asset management program. In the absence of maintaining it, then one day it's going to stop working. Or significant costs will be required to get it back into a reasonable shape. So Harvey's been part of those discussions, and we've chatted with the group, and things like the sewer tank filled up last year, and I said, well, is there a leach field? Things that we don't even know about, right? Because I said septic tanks don't fill up and unless it doesn't have a way to leach. So we don't know what that might even look like in terms of a future cost there. So all that is part of what we want to get under the hood of this year. It'll be a multi-year plan moving forward, but we continue to refine it. We'll get that line drawn up or drawn in the sand and provide that. But we did have the discussions with them, and they're quite relieved that there'll be a bit of a change of direction. And we did discuss the simulator piece in terms of there's quite likely that there's not a support to fund that, because it's doing the opposite of what they hoped. And it was a valiant effort to come up with an idea, to think of something. So they've got some decisions they're going to be chatting about as a board in terms of how to move forward with that, because it's, it's clear that, it's been discussed that it's not, most likely not going to be part of the operations of the golf course, because it is a separate piece moving forward, and cut your losses at some point, regarding that.
And if a private business decides to buy it off them and keeps it going, well, it's still in the community. Right? There's value there that's been created that might get less than full value to buy it, is what I'm saying. Right?
Exactly.
You might get it for $50 or whatever.
So
Do they own the simulator? Does somebody own it? There's a simulator rent of 9,000 in here. I thought they owned
That's
it.
that. No, that's the rent for the building, for the actual building. They're
Plus 14 in repairs and maintenance to the building. Okay. I'm glad that's on the separated out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that the simulators themselves belong to them. And I think that was part of the NDIT grant to actually buy it. And I did ask them to check with NDIT, and they did come back and said that NDIT only expects them to really make sure that it was in operation for a year. If it was in operation for less than a year, I think they'd be expecting to see some money back. But that's the word I got back from the golf course folks. Okay, not from there. I didn't phone NDIT myself. So but that's an aside. That's for them to work out with NDIT, not for us to work, because we're just separating that, backing it straight out of the budget in its entirety. Yeah. Yes, please.
And so we're moving forward, we would have direct supervision on our portion, whatever that portion ends up being. Like Harvey, we would have a position that would be responsible for that, like for the oversight of that. We wouldn't just, right?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, the golf course would fall under rec essentially, and Harvard delegate to would look after that. And then other departments like cart paths, for example, which are pretty similar in terms of a infrastructure to a walking trail or a sidewalk
Yeah.
or whatnot.
Public
To
works.
maintain the infrastructure. I mean, so the answer is yes.
Okay, so I just am getting to the point where if we do decide whatever number, the 142,000 or whatever number that we get to, we aren't simply handing over $142,000 to the golf course to manage. Is that where we're, or are we
There would
having
be-
more oversight?
There would need to be more oversight and a basic collaborative approach, right? So I mean, they're operating on our behalf, but us understanding what's occurring. And similar to the mayor's comment is if you separate things like food and beverage, if that's where it ends up going, then it's a lease agreement for potentially because the lease right now is like $100 lease, right? And then they take all their expenses, subtract revenues, you're hoping to deposit, but the difference is this organization funds the difference versus how they operate the food and beverage piece, and they lease that facility is up to them, besides obviously parameters within the lease of who's responsible for what we maintain from the clubhouse perspective. The operations of the golf course would be a higher level of oversight, but more of a partnership, I guess, would be in terms of how that's managed and who looks after what. So for lack of better words, we're not micromanaging, but we understand what's going on. And if they have an issue with the irrigation system, we're aware of it. They're not struggling on their own to deal with it. And we look at a path moving forward, which is currently what we're doing right now. For example, like the irrigation system, they have $15,000, I believe, in additional costs of their budget this year to do repairs in the irrigation system, but they really don't know what the problem is.
You have no
Right.
idea.
It's a bit of a needle in a haystack approach. And so Harv's actually contacted one of the previous groundskeepers that actually installed it back in 2005, I believe, Harv, and looking at some resources, because instead of digging up holes all over the place to try to figure out what wire might be broken, it's not activating the valve, it might be better up front to bring someone up here to, and it'll cost some money up front, but well, it's
more electrical issue right now, but-
yeah, it's the electrical and noticing that they're not getting irrigation in a certain area, right? But that's something that we would be working with them with. and have a high level of oversight to say, what's the best approach to potentially deal with this?
So I guess I'm just, sorry, if I may, just getting to the point where the municipality isn't going to be responsible for any cost overrun that they might have on the other side. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like,
Food and beverage. and
like,
whatnot.
yeah, because we need to, we've had that place. Now we need to make that distinction that the NRM is not going to be responsible to cover those shortages.
Yeah, and I think the shortages, and not to get into the weeds in terms of the shortages have been an overall shortage of operating the golf course. And if there's additional cost to operate, it's a council decision if you want to proceed,
Right.
or if there's an issue with a maintenance issue. Because generally, their revenues in terms of what they will be part of is cash positive. The food and beverage piece actually shows cash positive. The pro shop's about $2,000
If you look at the
to
wages.
the good.
Well, it depends on which wages, like we've,
Yeah.
so there's no wages in there separated out for the food and beverage. But we know there's, what is it, 160 minus 80,000, 160 revenue and 80. So there's $80,000 there for them to work with as far as having extra staff. Right? And, for me, I don't expect that if we're paying X for somebody in the pro shop to make, I don't expect, them to just sit there. If they can help, they work that out amongst, that we're giving that money to them. They work out how much staff they actually have, but you're right. We're not going to support food and beverage or any overages on that. So you should operate with the cash you receive.
I think similar to the discussions
accordingly.
we're having this week with the simulator, right? It's the
Yeah.
discussion with the simulator. That unfortunately, they have to make some tough decisions on the simulator, right? And they're aware of that. And we've chatted with them about that. But as a board, they have to decide how they want to proceed with it. They can keep the simulator open if they wish. If they can take one option they're talking about is potentially maybe just volunteering their own time to operate it and getting revenues from that. But that's entirely up to them as a board if they do so. And what they do know and they're aware of is that there's a likelihood, because it's not my decision, it's council's decision, but I advise there's a very high likelihood that council is not going to subsidize the operations of the simulator, because it's really a separate operation from the
And essentially, if you backed out their losses on that last year and put it back into their operation, they would have money to start up
They'd have
this
money to
year.
start
They'd
up.
have some, right? It's just that they tried an experiment and
the discussions possibly could be a little different in terms of their own revenues if their outlook this year looked different for the simulator. They had some startup costs they didn't expect last year, some repair costs to get that building up to code, and whatnot. And yeah, so it's unfortunate, but some things work and some things don't. And to your point, Mayor, yeah, one thing they don't have now is they're looking for potentially a small advance, not additional funds for an ask, but just to get started for April. So that's something that council would possibly need to consider, because to get the golf course up and running. So it doesn't change what the ask would be or what a potential funding amount would be. It's just because of the timing of the budgets this year, they typically start prepping the golf course in April. And if they don't prep it in April, then it just potentially reduces the revenues moving forward, because it won't be ready. It won't be ready for opening when the weather changes. So that's something else that they've indicated. And that's again back to the fact that they didn't carry over any funds into the new year.
Work to do.
so, yeah, there's work to do. So is your hand up? Councillor Schultz? Yeah.
I was just curious about I like the concept very much of the direction is the right direction, because it brings long-term clarity of operations and capital. It's really good that way. The question I have is related to just in the general revenue or total revenue numbers that they show in page 7. You've got the $200,000 ask in the capital revenue. And then you've got the BC Northern Development Grant of 50 grand and the NRM Capital Grant of 25 grand. And you add them up, of course, and that forms a good part of the total revenue of the system. when it comes to grants, and my question is around grants. If we take on the golf course as part of, recognized as part of our asset management system, even though we're all in favor of that, how would that or could that affect the golf course society's ability to look for grants? Because that too, that may change what grants are available to them and so on. Is that potential?
It could be potential, like from an NDI perspective, because there's certain grants that we can't
Yeah, we
apply
can't.
for through NDI that nonprofits can, for example. But it just depends on what that is. Like,
Right.
couldn't say for sure. Like, for example, we own the community hall at Toad. We have track, similarly, we pay track a fee essentially to look after some aspects of that community hall. We look after the asset and the maintenance piece, but there's aspects that they look after. They ensure that the heat's on and running and it's cleaned and et cetera. And they get some revenues from renting the hall and whatnot. But they actually put the deck on the building from an NDI grant, right?
Right.
Which
And-
wasn't,
From NDIT's perspective with respect to golf course, I have the experience that I have in Taylor says that NDIT, because they own it directly and operate it with their own staff. And they're eligible, like they've got cards.
Because of what it is.
Yeah, so they have been, as a community, have applied for grants for the golf course and have had them funded.
Yeah.
So.
yeah, that's why I can't speak specifically to the golf course. I use the community hall of Toad as an example because we, as an organization, weren't eligible to put the grant in to do the upgrade to the deck on the community hall.
Right.
Track did because they're nonprofit or society, and they were able to show a potential generation of additional income for rentals and whatnot as part of that submission, even though
So
the
you
hall
were-
belongs to us.
Yeah, we continue to work together.
So you do the same thing to see if there's an ability to do so, but sometimes there are limitations based on the eligibility requirements.
Yeah, and with respect to the monies that we're not exactly sure how they show $50,000 there for the Northern Development Grant. I think that was for the simulator and is that something different?
That's a $50,000. They have that in as an opportunity for potential grant opportunities. That particular.
Oh, that's for
50,000 is-
something new.
So they show that as they do show that as a revenue, and then they show the expense here. So it's a wash.
Oh,
So they basically
yeah.
say, if we get $50,000, we'll spend $50,000 on a potential grant opportunity. So they're thinking there might be a $50,000 opportunity. Sure.
Stage step.
Well, how would you like to proceed?
Well, it's not, so we were hoping for us to do tonight, give you a figure that we think is ballpark with the process, asking you to go and work with them.
The closer we can get, because that was only part of the discussion towards the end, because the numbers that you see in the net tax levy is not an approval of council, is basically where all the numbers land. So if you're comfortable or confident, I'll say that you're not going to approve a $200,000 spend with the golf course, and you want to make that decision tonight, and that's why it's you have the ability to do that. Then if you want to do a ballpark, you can. Council absolutely can.
Well, we're not making decisions with respect to the final budget.
Not final budget.
It's a draft budget.
It's a draft, but if I guess my point is that if council says we don't intend to grant $200,000, we'd much rather look at a number of 142. It's not an approval, but we would adjust the number in here accordingly and roll it and adjust the net tax levy accordingly also.
And continue to talk with them.
And still work with them and talk to them and whatnot. But that's again up to council, right? Because you're not making any decisions on the budget, but what you present to the public, it's better if it reflects more what it may look like versus what it's not going to look like. I
The
guess.
public always has an opportunity
Yes.
and then we take that information and use it accordingly as we do the final budget.
Exactly.
So a very simplistic way to look at, way to look at what we were just talking about. You went through the specific line items and come up with 142. And if we take a 200,000 ask and kick the simulator out, we're at 154. So we're not very far off anyway. And we're all gonna communicate that the simulator really has to go anyway. And therefore, we're somewhere around 150 grand is where it's going to land. It looks like from both sides of this, we're kind of willing to look at or willing to talk about in the preliminary budget process.
So,
So it would be kind of like council's interested in perhaps funding up to X amount of dollars. Now it's up for the golf course board to figure out how they'll manage it. Okay.
can we put 145 in? Good draft budget?
With the stipulation of what that is intended to cover, and if those costs end up being less than, right, like like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Is-
if there's a surplus at the end of the year, it's a nonprofit operating something that we own. So there's a discussion that needs to be had about what they do with the surplus. Is it added onto next year's operations? Do they put it in a startup fund to make sure that they've got startup money every year? Or do they put it into a capital fund that's for building more capital on our asset? That's a negotiation that needs to happen. So if we're over to some degree, there will be this surplus that hopefully the agreement between us and them will say, give options with respect to how they use that. So if we overestimate something, there's only 120 days in the year, then we've got some idea how that surplus will be used by them. That becomes part of the agreement. Yes,
So Aaron was just questioning this assembly in terms of they're making sure that there's not anything else, but we're okay. So
Yeah,
sorry about that. Yeah, in terms of, to your point, Mayor, if I'll use a round number, if their cost this year was $130,000 to operate overall, after you flush out all the differences and you presented them $130,000 next February, we're having the same conversation around advancing potential cash to get them to start up again in April, because they don't have the cash flow past that point because their year end is end of December. But if they do have additional funds at the end of the year, that's part of the discussion. It's where's the best use of those funds for the asset. I mean, if they're sitting with $15,000 and just December 31st, and they'll chew those funds up in April, right? Because I mean, for the materials and supplies and wages they need in April, it's probably sitting at, as a startup, $20,000 to $25,000 just to get through April, for example, right? Because they don't have any startup funds right now. It's not
so
additional.
it's an
funds.
advance.
So that would be an advance. Yeah, it's not additional funds. It's an advance on what they're.
This year's budget.
Yeah, because the reality is that if it's not about corn and council, of course, but it's if they don't, then there's realistically, it's the golf course could get delayed if either people are working for free, or if the golf course opening would be delayed because you wouldn't have the funds to
Which
start.
impacts revenue, which
Yeah.
impacts that or that.
Exactly.
So I don't know if that answered your question
No,
or not.
but-
Okay.
but I'm struggling a little bit in that, like 2021, the actual was 113,946, and the 2022 actual was 115,074. I know costs have gone up, but we are now talking about funding or more targeting our funding, but we're still looking at increasing like, I don't do the math good, sorry, Aaron, like $30,000 over last year, like
Well, we've
I'm
we've
just a
talked
little
about
struggle
25,000
there.
already. Right? The actual last year was 135. That's the request on there doesn't show, because we give them that $25,000 late in the year, remember?
That's not reflected here.
Right.
yeah, I do remember.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Yeah, I got that, but they were running the simulator and the losses that were occurring with the simulator in 2022, and the actual was still at 115 or plus 25.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know where I'm going with this? So I followed your math and I think that we need to have a discussion about what we are funding and what we aren't funding. And I think that that's a really important discussion to have with the executive of the club, is I don't want to risk losing the club. It's an incredible asset for our community, but I am just struggling with a $30,000, or if my math is wrong, so be it. But that grade of an increase this year. Because we're taking over a lot, but we're still giving 30,000, is it 30? So somebody correct my math, Trevor, but so we're giving $30,000 more, but we are also taking over most of the capital and this and that, and the next thing. So I was kind of thinking the same amount as last year, or yeah, I don't know that. I'm just, maybe I need some time to digest it or to come to review the numbers, but I'm just struggling a little bit to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I looked at it as, was the 110 or 135, which was it appropriate or was it plucked out of the air? You know, I mean, just based on all of the confusion about who does what. But to me, looking at the budget in a transition year, that's what our cost should be. Well, based on what they've provided, that's what it should be. And then you sit down, you work with them throughout the year, what it actually is, the split on the wages, what it actually is. Those are things that we get to determine as we move forward in this year. And I can tell you with golf courses, they're year over year, they're a little bit different because there's weather, there's other things that impact it. But for the most part, you get a pretty good idea of where the separation is if we can get them on board to actually tell us how much time their guys are spending on maintenance and how much on growing grass and doing that. And we'll get a better feel in year 2. And I suspect our costs will go down. They'll more adequately reflect what it actually costs. I don't see that the past budgets are accurately reflecting what our costs actually are. You recognized it yourself, but there's some things they're doing for us that they probably shouldn't have been doing. They spent a lot of $7,000 on.
That's my point, right? But we still, I mean, so they came in still under $142,000. And yet we are going to be taking over so many more of those costs this year that I'm just thinking $142,000 might be more, might be high in terms, because we are then going to have all of the capital costs that council approves on top of that $142,000. So at the end of the day, we could be
200,000.
yeah,
But
but having control over.
it's in the appropriate places in that transition year.
Yeah, and if I might add, they were doing reactive maintenance to existing capital or trying to, plan for it this year, which is a cost no matter what needs to occur. Just there's a likelihood that, the irrigation system is a good example. You spend an awful lot of potential time and money on the irrigation system to try to fix it if you don't sit back and make a plan and to try to take the most reasonable approach, not necessarily that it's going to end up cheap or that irrigation system could be an expensive repair, right? But at least collaboratively, we're in there trying to understand what an approach might be, because you can spend a lot of time and money and effort digging up areas at a golf course, trying to search for a break in the line versus looking for the as-built and have an understanding where it went in and where that issue might be and bringing someone in. In terms of the costs, prior to mayor going through a lengthy process of trying to strip out who owns what or who's responsible for what, we did a bit of just simple math, similar to what Councilor Souls did, right? When you subtract and work your way back what their ask is this year, if you subtract the 25 grand for the capital on the cart paths, which is a cost that needs to occur no matter who pays for it. It needs to occur, but most likely is more than 25 grand. They basically put a placeholder in to say, there's some spots where you got roots and trees going up the cart path and people are driving around, right? But if you subtract that, if you subtract the losses on the simulator, which there's some sunk losses in January, to be honest, there is already. They lost some money in January and they had a break even, maybe made $1,000, $1,500 in February, right? But there's some costs that simulator costs in January. But if you subtract what the remainder of the potential losses would be of the simulator and subtract it from their ask, and you remove the 15 grand that's an additional ask or part of the ask this year for the irrigation system, you're sitting at about 135 grand, give or take, right? And it's the ask that they had for last year to operate. Is what's because at the end of the year, it was $110,000 that was given to them and 25 grand for those additional costs at the end of the year. So, and that's just to operate. And they did show they would have posted a profit last year, right?
But that included the food and beverage operations.
But that
So
included-
now we're taking all that out, like
Right.
that's,
That's why it's a transition.
so that's why I just think it's more.
But that said, to the mayor's point too, is that part of the agreement is, I mean, they can't, it's about, I mean, additional, right now it's $100 lease annually. That lease to operate would be most likely different, not $100 moving forward to get revenues for them. It's ensuring there's a balance, so that both parties, I guess, come out reasonable or from a cost and revenue perspective, right? They can't take the cash or any profits and run with it or use it themselves because they're nonprofit. They can invest it in something else or use it for something else if they choose as a simulator or something, but that's the part of the negotiation in terms of who's responsible for what, right? We've had times before, like not recently with the rec center, but for the concession at the rec center, we've attached profits or revenues as part of the lease agreement. If you make X, we get a certain amount of those profits, 15% or 10% or whatever that number might be. Hasn't been the case recently because rec center concession is not necessarily doing that great, but there's different options to do that. I think the intent would be to have a reasonable agreement so that at the end of the year, there's enough cash for that organization to be able to start up the next year. And if there's any potential surplus, there's an agreement in terms of where that surplus goes, right? If it's to roll into the next year for operations to help, or if it's to go into an aging clubhouse that they want to operate, which was all the organization, this organization funded previously when all the operations were funded by the group. So to me, that's part of the conversation, right? The challenge right now is right this very moment is being able to understand that, because there's a fair amount of work to do to kind of strip through that and have that, right? So, but just generally from a across the board perspective, if you strip out some of the other stuff that they've added in this year to maintain our asset, it needs to be spent anyway. It's either spent under their umbrella or ours. But if you look at apples, their ask is about the same as last year, and you factor in the additional 25 grand.
So I'll say one last thing. The approach I took in the way I looked at their numbers and added up what I thought our costs would be supports the agreement that we're trying to make with them with respect to who's going to look after what. To not use an approach like this, I think is an arbitrary number. How much, so I'm prepared to listen to you. What should the number be then if it's not 142.5? What should it be?
Well, I haven't gone through
Right.
the numbers, being that I just got this afternoon. So yeah, I didn't have time this afternoon to go through line by line as you did. So
Yeah.
I think that's an unfair question to ask me
Oh, I'm
at the
sorry.
moment.
I didn't mean it
I'm
that
not
way.
prepared to just come up with an arbitrary figure. My point was simply to express my discomfort in the amount, the 142, I'm not saying it's not based in fact, and I'm not interested in pulling a number out of the air. I just wanted to make the comparison to previous years, that it was a fair bit more than what was done in 2021 and 22. So that was all
I
my
understand.
intent was.
Thanks. What would you guys like to do?
I'm not opposed to having it presented with the 142. Like, we're still gonna take it out to the public. We're still gonna, that'll give us more time to look at it and dissect it. It's a starting point, I think, when we present it to the public, and I would be comfortable bringing it to the public in that way. Like, here's an avenue we started. We're working on it until our final budget deliberation, when we'll make our final decision.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so for draft purposes then, we'll put in $142,000 for tab number 20. Do we want to eat? Yeah, let's eat. Let's take 20 minutes and we'll recess and have something to eat. So based on who's here, I would like to skip the library discussion and go to the Historical Society. And that way you're not out and then the end and waiting and wondering what. We'll just skip it for now. And we'll figure out whatever the next time is. I mean, we're 15 minutes, right? Till we have the time that we said we would stop. I don't know how everybody's feeling. Give me an idea whether you've got time for another hour.
Kim and I are both here.
Oh.
I just know I already told Val. She says, yeah, we don't. Let her enjoy.
I'm fine to stay.
Pretty good.
Let's just drift the Band-Aid and do it all at once.
I don't know that we'll get it all. All right, let's go to the Historical Society,
22.
tab 22. Yeah, Cultural Museum, yeah. And the grant was asked for by the Historical Society. All right, staff.
Do it, you go.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just do a quick summary of the questions and information that were asked and provided since the last meeting. And basically, the museum was one of those organizations that had provided all of the information. It's a matter of getting it pointed out to me. So, we added the budget information. There was a question about what the forward-looking $22,000 is for on the capital. And it is actually specified just above the amount on their report that they provided. I'll just get the page number for you. Page 9 of 13. Just above right at the bottom is the request for capital funds. You'll see 22,000 along the bottom there. And just above that, they've identified what that's composed of. And yeah. So that's, and I think what else? There was a question about whether we funded any of their collection, and the answer is we're not sure. Yeah, that's not something that I think it would take a lot of work to dig back into history to try to come up with a response to that.
Yeah, well, once we go around, Kim's here, and I think she said she'd do her best to answer some questions. So once we figure out what all the questions are, we'll ask Kim to speak to them. Is that all right, Kim? Okay.
And that's about it. So all the information is there available for you now.
Okay. comments or questions?
So I think if I'm reading this correctly, for 2022, the actual of operating was 117,500, and 2023, you're estimating or you're budgeting the operating is going to be 110,000. So you're actually anticipating that operating costs are going to be $7,500 less, if I'm doing my math correctly.
That is what it says.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So I had a question about the, and I don't know if the rest of you noticed, I couldn't follow the 2022 actuals on page 9. I couldn't follow the net operating income of 83,493, which is substantial to the 2023 revenues anywhere. And so I was just wondering if Kim could speak to that. So page 9. Oh, yeah, sure. So for the mics, yeah. Ruth, you were here. Do we need a resolution to allow her to speak at the meeting? I can't remember what the procedure bylaws. Yeah, okay. Okay, all right.
You're gonna have to ask me the question again.
Okay, so following down your 2022 actual line.
Yep.
You come to the bottom and it says net operating income or loss. And it says $83,494.
Yes.
Okay, and then in the 2023 revenue, it doesn't show it anywhere as that I can see. So maybe you can explain, because you gave me a brief explanation over there, and I thought maybe.
So I believe she's got, if you go up to under revenue, she's got said there's an other grant revenue, which is $75,000. That's a grant from the federal government under the Canadian Heritage Canadian Small Spaces Fund. She's got that in there. We have not spent that yet. So it's still sitting in our bank account, still sitting there waiting to be spent. That grant is very specific on what we can use it for. And a lot of it is for interior stuff of the new building, new computer for Jamie, new scanners for Jamie. Most of it has to do with the collection. It has to do with programming. So we were very, very fortunate. We had originally asked them for a lot more than that, and it was oversubscribed, and they came back to us really wanting to give the Northeast something, and worked with us, and we came to that number. So we haven't spent it yet because, of course, we're not quite ready to spend it yet.
Right.
Of that $75,000, I do have an approved budget of about 45 that we will spend probably within the next 30 to 60 days. And then there's the wishes and the wants, right? And some decisions will have to be made.
Right, so that was allotted in 2022, other grant revenue, $75,000, and that helped to make the 83,000 at the bottom there.
It
And that's
appears
just sitting
so.
in a bank account. It's already committed because of the conditions of the grant that you've got. So your
That's right.
actual surplus was 83 minus 75.
I think
$8,000.
so, based on I'm just looking here. I don't do the financial statements. I am the business manager, but that's what it appears to be to me, is she's got the 75 in there. And we do have that, and it is unspent at this time.
Okay, thanks. So I guess the outstanding question is about the capital and the $80,000 for the grant that you've asked from the municipality to enter into an auction and try to build the collection. So
Yes.
I wonder if you can explain to the council and I guess the public, the board's reason, I guess,
Okay.
to apply for that.
Historically, we've always had a line item for artifacts purchasing and restoration. It's been there for as long as I can remember. It's usually in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. Normally the purchases are of more small in nature. This particular year, and with Marl's passing a couple of years ago, his family is taking some of his estate and sending it to auction. There are 3, possibly 4 vehicles in which the museum wishes to purchase. They're very near and dear to our hearts for a variety of different reasons. We had hoped to get a right of first refusal and be able to offer the Brown family, a price for them or negotiate. The family wishes for us to bid on those vehicles, just like the general public. So in determining the cost that we should be putting in there, we put in the appraised value. Whether or not we pay the appraised value or not is dependent upon the bid. Of course, we're not going to go in with and it's a bid, it's an auction, right? We're not going to go in there at the high appraised value. We do recognize that it is taxpayer money. We want to get the best bang for our buck. And we are prepared that those cars may go much higher than we can afford, and we may not get them. But the board did specifically, there are 3 or 4 of them. We'd like to have them. And that's, why it's in the capital request to mayor and council. That auction is in June, and it's online one day.
So if you weren't successful, what would happen with the money if we granted it to you?
If we weren't
If you weren't
successful,
successful, but yet we granted, the Republic granted you the money, what?
oh
Right,
gosh, we never even discussed that. My assumption would be it would be rolled over and it would be reflective in the following year in our budget for sure. We wouldn't spend it on something else if that's what you're asking.
yeah, just
No.
wondering whether it would come back or whether you would roll it over.
It would be
or-
rolled over. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
I'm just wondering, in 2022 actual, there is no amount under artifacts. Is that just because you were doing the reno that year or the addition, I guess?
In capital, down, same page,
Full same page.
Yeah, sorry.
planned expenditures down.
Yeah, so no, that would be, I'm gonna say no, that normally we have an amount in there. I'm actually surprised to see there is no amount in there, to be honest.
Yeah, that whole
So-
section is blank.
Yeah, is there another?
So then I guess that my next question,
Is it on the next page?
Page 11.
I don't have a page 11, believe it or not.
Got 10,000 and actual was 4167. So I'm on page.
Oh, I don't have this page.
Page 11.
Page 11.
Artifacts purchasing and restoration. They spent 4167.
that's 2021,
Oh, yeah, that is too.
It is, yeah.
but under
we
2022
don't see
budget, but you
Yeah.
didn't actually, it's not actually under that 20. So I guess I'm just fine. Just wondering what is in that amount, like how much, if you are contributing to the artifact line every year, how much do you currently have set aside for artifacts?
That would be an Allison question. Sadly, she's not here, but I can get you that answer very
Okay,
quickly.
yeah, if
Yeah.
I could know that, please. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I think if I'm going on a limb here. I think it rolls over and we just pull it off, the next year's ask, if that money's there, we're like, we always have an account balance at the end of the year, at our fiscal year end. It would sit there and we would likely reduce, I'm thinking we reduce our ask to the mayor and council, but I'll confirm that for you.
Yeah, all that whole section is missing with respect to the actual
For
capital.
2022.
For 2022, yeah. So it was, it would be interesting to see what that is. Okay, are we, I'm comfortable to hear what the public has to say about adding to the collection with taxpayer funds. So I'm comfortable putting it in there and come that night, if anybody shows up, ask them what they think.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? So does that mean tab number 22 is done? No.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. You've got a meeting to go to.
$80,000 here, but
Oh, because there's another.
There's another
Oh my
10,000
gosh, yeah.
for the ditching and stuff, I think she said, wasn't it? Yeah. Mm.
So I'm wondering on the.
Go ahead. Yeah, we are. You're good? Okay. Can we go to tab number 23 then, please? The cultural, I want, when I see the word culture, I want to directly jump to the cultural center, right? Because that's in my mind. The theater, yeah. Staff, please.
Okay, with the theater, there was some information added. We added the 2022 budget information to the backup. And then we had a subsequent submission from the theater providing an annual report, which has been put in as a supplement.
I'm just calling this up. For questions? Anybody has questions? Okay. I had a quick look at it this afternoon as well. It was the amount of time I spent on the golf course. This one was last in it. You know, I got down to the bottom of it. On the face of it, it seems reasonable. It's pretty much the same as it was last year. Their capital looks like they've got existing funds for most of the capital that they're looking for. And essentially the ask is the same, which is $151,000 plus the in-kind in utilities, which is $33,000. So for a total, so the cash would be 151, right? But the total grant, because we keep track of that, is 184, which is essentially the same. So go ahead.
Did the 151 include the in-kind utilities?
No, if you haven't had a chance.
I have
That's one
not.
of the things I did get to look at. It's actually $33,000 and they have a line item for that. So it's 151 and the 33. So it's,
So that's new this year?
No, so if you're looking at, tab 23, where it has the 2022 actual, there you see also the 151. So that just hasn't been updated to include that rent in kind amount that the mayor's talking about.
Oh, so it should have been 184.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you.
thanks, Trevor. Saved me from trying to scramble through this and try to find it. I did see it somewhere. Okay, so is everybody okay with that 184 going in the draft budget for the public? Okay. Good. Then, boy. Thank you very much. We'll go to the library, tab number 21. I think that's all we have. That's all we have, correct? Oh, yes, yeah, that's right.
And before we get into tab 21, the library, I'll declare a conflict of interest.
Thank you. Port Nelson Public Library.
Thank you, Mayor. I did mention earlier, we added the 2022 actuals were requested, so that has been added to the information. And then we had a confirmation of the apparent discrepancy of the increase that was noted on the application versus the actual increase from our perspective, the ask from 2022 versus the ask of 2023. So it was just the way that the library was considering their base request. And then their annual report, I think we had that added in last time as well. So
Okay, you crunch the numbers, the 11% increase in the ask is accurate? So that's on the green sheet, the first page,
Right,
okay? Now that I have the actuals, I'm trying to find where last year's budget was. I don't see it anywhere. Oh, there it is. It appears to me from the actuals that their net surplus was $72,000. So do we do any work with these organizations to affirm those numbers? Like whether or not so we're not sitting them down and asking about that, because if there's $72,000 profit, not profit, but net surplus from last year that's not spent, if that's accurate, then that adds to the cash available to this year's. And so in actual fact, they would have what's their budget? What are they looking for? They would have the 434,000 plus the 72. They'd have almost $500,000 available to them.
They're asking for 3.
Yeah, but yeah, it's from us. Yeah, okay. But their total, I'm looking at the total revenue for them for the year and how much they would have available to them for the entire year. So and I guess it's asking that question of need, right? Do they need $72,000 less, or even if they had some carryover left, what would that look like? And so I didn't see anywhere where that surplus was accounted for.
yeah. So they do provide their financial statements, and you've stated it though. What happens is the surplus goes into their accumulated surplus. So we don't have specific requirements about how our organizations present their balance sheet and their surplus information to us. But in the case of the library, what we do see is that they've got about $30,000 in a contingency fund, and 12,000 is internally restricted. And then the balance of around $195,000 is simply general surplus. That's all essentially represented by cash on their balance sheet, right? They've got cash of $240,000.
So may I?
Oh, I was just going to confirm. So that's in the 2022 financial statements or the 2020?
2021,
Thanks.
yes.
So it's potentially even higher than that. Yeah. Okay.
So can I just confirm on the application that all of these groups are supposed to sign? It says, like under authorization, page 2 of the application or whatever, it says, I agree that any funding requirements deemed not to be needed for that fiscal year will be held and deducted from the future year's request. So correct me if I am not thinking, well, no, I'm thinking, but correct me if my thinking is flawed. There we go. It's late.
No, it's not. It's only 7 o'clock.
So if there was a surplus of $72,000, should that not be reflected in the next year's ask as a reduction?
Based on the wording of the application, I think you're correct, yes.
Okay, so who watches, like who looks for that? Us, is that?
That would be our responsibility, yes. And it's not something that I have policed.
Okay, because I think the Phoenix Theater, we could see the same thing at the Phoenix Theater's
Yeah.
financials,
It's a smaller amount. Yeah.
but
But it's there. Yeah.
it's the same concept,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. What, and unfortunately, but I would refer to the work that we will be doing and completing with regards to the policy development around grants to groups. And we'll certainly have the mechanism in place to ensure that what we say needs to happen will be happening.
So I guess it's just difficult from my perspective then to work with was it $34,000 or $34,000 increase if they have $72,000 left from the previous year. So just struggling with that.
Yeah, and I'm sort of in the same place, and I agree, based on the exercise that we're going through, that a consistent approach to the way the information is presented to us is going to be important for us as well. And so sitting down and figure out as part of the policy, you talked about what a standard, what the information we're looking for. Then they know what to keep from an information perspective, and then what our expectations are from a need perspective before they ask us for money. I have a hard time if these guys have 292, I think you said, plus 72, $350,000, in reserve. I have trouble giving them an 11% increase when there's so many others that are having difficulty out there.
Can we get that amount? Can we get that verified? Like, I mean, when you asked the question of the Historical Society, they were able to come up with an explanation. Is it possible to get an explanation from the library, or should we do that?
We can ask the question, definitely.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, it'll be in their consolidated in the 2022 financial statements, right? And they might not have that ready.
So I just, sorry, Mayor, when you did your math, did you do it based on the, I'm having some technical difficulties, so pardon me here.
I did it on this document.
And that's the one, I think, so on the top of that, it says as of December 1st, 2022, so they might be missing a month's worth of expenses in too. That's a challenge with trying to get the actuals.
Oh, that little wee tiny
yeah.
yellow.
Yeah,
white-
it's in white font right under 2022.
But it's
Jane
only
is
1
pointing
month
it out.
out a day.
Yeah, just in terms of the numbers, I just want to confirm that was where the information, just, again, we still have to ask the questions and just to confirm, and they might have even updated information, but
Yeah.
that's the challenge sometimes with looking at the actuals so close at the end of the new year, into the new year, right? Because
Yeah, but we're
totally,
we're 3 months in. Surely they could have given us till the year end, to the end of the year. Actuals.
yes, yeah, no, for sure. Just to, I'm not quite sure how accurate this is based
Okay,
on what they
so the
stated.
72 might not be accurate
Yeah.
because it's missing 1 month.
Most possibly based on that little very hard to read font under
Yeah.
2022.
Yeah, I see that there, and so I stand corrected that the $72,115 might not be entirely accurate. But,
Could I get,
can we get the actual then? Can we-
and, sorry. The other thing is the provincial government announced an increase funding to public libraries happening in 2023. And so if you're already asking them a question, might you ask what that means for the Fort Nelson Public Library? Because it could be a substantial amount or not, but it would be good to know.
Yeah, and in actual fact, they're actually showing a reduction in their provincial grant. The actuals up until December 1st, there was provincial grants 73,000, and they're just showing provincial grants of 40,000. So there's a significant reduction in.
That would be interesting to know why
Yeah.
that as well, but the province has announced an increased funding to all public libraries in BC for 2023, so.
Yeah, so there's a few more questions there. That we can- Okay. So I think we're down to really just the library, correct? That's outstanding with respect to completing grants to community groups for the draft budget. What is getting really.
It's not. Excuse me, it's not right. Okay.
So is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
But may I
We're
make a
Please.
point? So if we're going ahead with the golf course without having all of our questions answered, I'm just putting this out there for council, is we could go forth with the library as it stands right now. That doesn't mean that that's how it's going to happen at the actual budget meeting, but I think what Mr. Barry needs us to decide today so that staff can move forward with the process is, are we comfortable including this or not? Mayor, are you?
Yep.
Yep.
That's, I get your point. So instead of waiting for that, so the ask is
348,584.
we can, I'm comfortable putting it in there and get the information and bring it back and I mean, let them know we're wondering about this accumulated surplus and why they'd be asking for such a big raise. Maybe it's time to use that accumulated surplus.
I think one of the things that I can't speak on behalf of the library, we'll find out the question. I know one thing they've been working on is a bit of an asset management program themselves to smooth out future costs. So that they can smooth out the peaks and valleys essentially with replacement of various items, computers or whatnot, but I can't speak to that specifically with that. But I know they are working on something in the background to help build a reserve to help future expenditures to not impact that particular budget year.
And that's fine. If they want to come and
But they
present
can
that to
present
us, yeah, explain that exactly how much of that almost $500,000 is capital or, operating. Well, it was 3 something plus the 7.
Oh,
Yeah.
Plus
Plus
the 72, but I think there's.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm good with that approach. Okay. Got everything you need? Is there any other questions? Thank you for the lively discussion. And it is too bad it was such short notice. Because some of us weren't entirely prepared. I was lucky I had the afternoon where I could sit down and get through a bunch of it and solidify my thoughts, but it doesn't look like everybody had that same opportunity. So
It was challenging to get we worked around the clock.
Yeah.
The group did
Well,
last
thank
week to get the information. Obviously it's been a challenge and apologize for the short notice, of course. Appreciate the discussion and the feedback. Some learnings, and of course, with new council, we changed some processes too to kind of accommodate the needs of the council. So it's good to see because we're getting some clear direction. So that's nice too. So appreciate that. Right now we have the 20th booked for the rec center. The changes, there'll be some updates and changes to that required net tax levy. Based on some original conversations, because we didn't come here tonight and say replace the front dock and whatnot. So there'll be a document that will be provided for that prelim, that open house perspective, that'll have some accurate numbers in there because when we, for example, we moved the toad number for the maintenance piece into the rec line item. So it doesn't change the overall but it changes rec's numbers. And it changes how the roll up of the information with that private 11x17 document is, so that that document reflects what's in the rest of the binder. We'll be obviously reducing the requests from the golf course. That'll make a bit of a reduction also from the grants to community organizations. But there'll be an addition of $100,000 for the pathway that's obviously been discussed through council from the museum to the campground. So that'll be an increase there. We don't have any number yet specific to the pullouts. It's a report that hasn't come back to council in the signage piece because we have no idea what a number will be for a project, because that can be anywhere from 50,000 to 5 million, depending on what council wants, because they need to put a pullout in.
I had it in my mind to ask them today at the Ministry of Transportation what they'd expect. And I went right out of my mind with the discussion.
And the challenge with it, Mayor, is from a permit perspective, they can tell us what that is. From a cost perspective, it's based on what kind of pullout do you want, the size of it, the location, the drainage issue. There's so much work required to determine that, because you can probably, I mean, if you're putting one in town here, say close to where the existing bear is by the water treatment plant, if you do that, you have to secure the area and get a permission to pull out into the right of way. We probably have to do a drainage study to determine what size of culvert goes in. And then depending on what you want to pull in there, if it is a pullout, then if you want a 40-foot motorhome towing a Jeep,
How they get in and
how do they get
out.
in and how do they get out, which probably requires decel acceleration lane, which means a widening of the highway. There's such a broad scope that could occur with that.
It's
And-
just not a painted piece of plywood on the side of that.
No, so what we would possibly, if such a report that goes back to council, because even with the signage, it's exactly a piece of plywood. Are you looking at branding to the organization? Because currently we have snow-covered peaks that say Opportunity at its Peak versus or snow-covered mountains versus is
Oh,
or
we should.
oh, sorry, yes. Councillor Andrews,
Oh,
He's like.
hopefully he can hear.
this is the library.
We're so making decisions on pullouts that you're still out there.
We got talking about the pullout.
And
Well, that's, I looked over and said, oh, geez.
sorry, Councillor Andrews. And then with the signage, for example, is it a branding episode that we're looking at for the municipality, or is it specific that, there's the streeters are in live in the community and this is a home of them, right? So there's it's a moving target based on that need, and we have to provide a fulsome report to council to say what those steps look like, what that scope looks like. What one thing we may do, and it could be part of council's discussion, is maybe it's a placeholder in there too, because there'll be some consulting work and potential Class D cost estimates and all kinds of stuff that would be required. So it's long story short, it's a fairly extensive program, especially if you look at branding, you're doing community engagement and all that piece too, if it is branding, and we don't know what that is. So that's not in the budget. So, but just that's the reason why. And I'm missing one. House. Reports on Monday's meeting, or it's on the agenda for Monday's meeting to just give council a quick review of what that is, what that may look like, and to see if council wants to secure a budget, not to secure a budget, to have a budget added to the provisional document, right? Anything that's agreed to at that time would increase the tax levy, because anything we add in here and throw in here increases the tax levy. So one of the things that we need to be very cognizant of when we communicate to the public is that this document is basically a total of all the things that are on the table, but not necessarily, it's not an approved budget, because you're not going to the public saying, because we came forward and it's a $1.4 million difference in the tax levy from last year, which is about a 7% difference from last year's levy when you factor in everything. If you add a round number, if you add a $300,000 house, a $100,000 sidewalk, and a $50,000 fee for this and whatnot, you start creeping to 1.8, 1.9. But there's also council discussion in the deliberation process of potential funding sources, right? In terms of if it's general surplus that you want to dip into, or the financial stabilization fund to help offset some of those one-time costs, because every year we hope we're not buying a house, for example. And if a sidewalk does go ahead this year for that area, it's not a sidewalk in that location isn't going to occur next year. Hope not anyway. So we'll have to really on it internally here is work on the messaging for the public, so they don't think that council. It's more around feedback in terms of what can the community bear and what are they willing to bear, and based on operations, projects, services for the community. Because the likelihood of having an increase of 1.8 or 9 million isn't a reality based on some other options from a funding perspective, and council not approving certain projects too, right? So it's just advising you of that, because we sat down and talked about 1.4 and change, and that number now will be increased upwards of $500,000 based on some of the additions that would come in that budget. From the time we printed originally to now.
Yeah, could we, and forgive me if I've read it and missed it, could we get a breakdown on the tax levy for $1 million, how that would break down into each of the classes?
Yeah, it's in here at $100,000.
Is it in here?
For $100,000, so we can
Oh,
change the
oh,
number.
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
If it's here, I
Yeah,
apologize.
it's $100,000 of spend and $100,000 of assessment for each area.
Each category?
Class, each class.
So I can sit down and figure out on a $300,000 house what it would take
Yes.
to collect
Yeah, it's
$1
at the,
million.
it's at the beginning. It's in the, it's in the intro and there's a little small.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I did see it, but went right past it.
So I did request some information around the reserve accounts, like how much is in each of those reserve accounts?
Yes, so we're.
Because I think we have the total number.
Yeah.
But we don't have it by breakdown.
Yeah.
And then just wanted to also mention that when you talked about other sources of reducing the budget, is that just to remind council that this budget includes an increase into the reserve envelopes.
Yes.
Ceiling
There's
increase,
a-
so
yeah.
like just, yeah, that's another thing that council could look
Yep,
at. if we were
absolutely, yeah.
Looking at,
Yeah.
Reducing the budget.
yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and yes, we're still, Trevor's still, the information on the reserve funds, we want to make sure we give the most accurate information as possible. So like the auditors are actually here right now. They might still be up in their even room, probably good chance. So again, that's a challenge because those numbers might adjust a bit when we look at other financial statements. So we could give numbers now that we think it is, but it could shift a bit now from a economy of scale perspective, not huge shifts, but we like to provide what we can. That's
But
most-
we're gonna have access to that before we have to make these decisions.
Absolutely.
Thank
So,
you.
so when we provide the final document, final draft document to council for the make the decisions on, the actuals at that time are updated. So it's a higher level of confidence based on where we are from a year end and an auditing perspective. And the same thing with any of the reserve accounts that we've got. So we actually include that as part of the document for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody else? Watch away. That's it. All right, then I'll declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.